Welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. I just got out of Elvis. I'm currently trying to negotiate my way out of a parking lot. Elvis. I had not the highest of expectations for this movie because the minute you see a music biopic or a biopic about anyone who is currently alive, or not currently alive, but like has people who are alive, who are related to that person, they're making comments and saying things about said thing and saying it's great and they really portrayed him well. My initial thought is always, oh, so they're not being honest. It's kind of like, what was his name? Elton John being involved in the production of, what was that one called? Rocket Man, or like how you end up with these kind of very sanitized versions of people's lives, which that's not how things are. Because look, life isn't clean and life is messy, and especially when we get into the lives of the rich and famous. And when we're talking about a person like Elvis, who I've talked about this before on 30-minute reviews, on at least two separate occasions. I feel like I may have done it 3 times. Talking about adapting children's books or adapting really any books into movies or TV shows. And I've always said that Dan Gutman has this series of books that he released in the mid-2000s called The Baseball Card Adventures, about this kid, Joe, who can travel through time holding baseball cards. And I think that it's one of those things that, like, you're surprised the MLB hasn't jumped on yet to do, like, a Netflix series, because it's the kind of thing where it's like America has its own mythology. Every country has its mythology. But American, I would say folk heroes, or like mythological heroes, to an extent, our pop culture figures fall into those categories, where, like, characters, like, we have, like, the Western hero, we have the superhero powered by, nuclear experimentation because of how our past kind of influences these people, but we also have this lionization of pop culture figures from the past, and taking these characters and these people and turning them into icons above and beyond, their life. Like, beyond Elvis, there's like Marilyn Monroe, and looking at sports figures like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig. I mean, maybe that's just me being a Yankee fan, but like Jackie Robinson and all of these other people who were not just icons of their field, but also massive figures beyond their death, and immortal in a way, in the same way that we look at mythological figures from ancient Greece and ancient Rome have lived on past their life. Now, it's not to say that we're going to be sitting here and we're going to be, like, thousands of years from now reading the legend of Babe Ruth calling a shot and treating it the same way we treat the story of Jason and the Argonauts, but it is this kind of look at, like, how we treat these characters, like these people, and Elvis kind of has that larger than life thing, and this story really, this movie really tells the story of how he got that, and how, and another thing is too, we get a lot of is when you see this, the idea of ingraining in someone's head comes down to a lot of times capitalism, and that's what this movie's about how his manager exploited the crap out of him, exploited the crap out of his image, and took advantage of this poor kid from Memphis and turned him into a pop icon for his own personal benefit. And everyone in the movie is great. Let me just get that out of the way now. The strong acting performances from Tom Hanks and from Austin Butler, who, after seeing this movie, I'm now completely sold on Austin Butler as Fade Routha. I've never really seen him in anything besides Yoga Hosers, so I wasn't 100% committed to him in that. But seeing him here, he did an absolutely fantastic job. I think he'll be in contention for a Best Actor nomination. He'll definitely be in the conversation if he doesn't get nominated. I don't know if he wins or not. Let's wait to see what other performances come out, but it's just all around a fantastic performance by him, and also by Tom Hanks in a supporting role. What else is there? But I feel like what this movie does well is, and what it does that's interesting, is framing it like it's a comic book movie. And that goes back to what I said about, when we look at our pop culture heroes and pop culture figures who have gone above and beyond into this larger-than-life role, what we end up with is this idea of telling this story as if he is a comic book character, and there is a lot of Shazam in there. I'm sorry, that's Captain Marvel, because it's before Fawcett got bought by DC, and then DC got sued by Marvel, or vice versa, and then DC gave up the use of the name Captain Marvel for who is now known as Shazam, and let Marvel use it for Marvel, and then Monica Rambeau, and then Carol Danvers, and yada yada yada. So here's I understand completely taking this approach to telling this story, and I think it really works because of the fact of how America lionizes pop culture figures and makes them into these mythical characters that are larger than they ever could be. There's also this, the undercurrent that's all through the movie is the racial tensions of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that is, stoked by racists. And there is an interesting critique on cancel culture in the movie as well, and I think that's something that's kind of interesting, because it does point out the completely accurate portrayal that cancel culture, up until, how it's portrayed now by the right-wing media, has largely been a conservative effort. And then there is also a commentary on, it's a small thing, but I noticed it. It's this thing where, looking at why Elvis is being treated the way he is, it's not just the racial aspect, but there's also this aspect of keeping women down for doing the same thing men do, where there's a sequence where we see him on stage, and the reaction that women get in the movie, as portrayed in the movie, the way that it's shown, comes from the sexual repression of the 50s and the 60s, that if you want to see a great movie about that, I would recommend Splendor in the Grass. It's this Natalie Wood movie. It's fantastic about sexual repression and teenagers of the era dealing with that, and how the idea that these natural urges are meant to be something to be ashamed of, and all of that. And then what ends up happening is, that's why we get this reaction to Elvis and why people are so freaked out by Elvis. But at the same time, in the concert that he gives in the baseball stadium, where he goes up and he was told not to wiggle or gyrate or anything, because because of the reaction it causes in women. In that same concert, the opening act is a bunch of women in unitards, doing a kick line routine, and it's well, how is that any different? And then there's the whole integration aspect of it, and talking about how he is portrayed to have a very strong social conscience in this movie, and I think that's an interesting approach. I've never really heard that about Elvis, and quite honestly, a lot of what happens in this movie is not something that's been widely explored when you hear the story of Elvis. The story of Elvis is always, he's the kid from Memphis who, went on and became the king of rock and roll. And then as you grow older, you hear he ripped off a bunch of black musicians, but the movie kind of portrays it where it's kind of okay. Although I'd be interested to hear how do people really feel about that, in the black community. I think that the idea that you get this look at his life in such a unique way, and I love the framing device being the guy who screwed him over the entire way through the movie, and he's just powerless to stop him the entire way through the movie. That guy narrating the entire movie and telling the story is so interesting, and it's so unique, because he not only do we see him financially abuse Elvis throughout the movie, but also not only does he gaslight Elvis throughout the movie, but he gaslights the audience and blames the audience for, and it's something you never see, is this idea of not just the unreliable narrator or the narrator who is involved in the story and has their own reasons for telling the story the way they are, but this idea that the narrator is also actively attempting to convince the audience that what they're seeing and the story that they're witnessing is not actually what happened is very interesting from a narrative perspective. It's such a cool, different use of this, and this is definitely a movie worth seeing. I saw it in a Dolby Cinema. I don't know how much different it would be in a regular theater, but it is so well done, and it's such a well-made movie. It's worth watching if even if you have a passing interest in Elvis, or if you're like me, and I, prior to seeing this, I had zero interest in, or let's not say zero interest, that sounds mean. Let's say I knew nothing about Elvis going into this movie. I didn't have a deep love for Elvis. The extent of my Elvis knowledge was, a little gray cat with a white belly ran across the street. The extent of my Elvis knowledge came from, Lilo and Stitch to an extent. Watching Lilo and Stitch and seeing him, his music have that huge role in her life, and the movie turned 20 today. That was something that really, that was really my only entrance to Elvis. And beyond that, it's like, all right, he existed, and you hear the myth of him, dying the way he did. And it feels like such a messed up way to kind of surmise his life. And then the movie even explains the drug use and gives you, not a rationale where you're like, oh, fuck, I'm going to start drugs now, too, but a reason where you can look at what he did and be like, you know what? If you're in his situation, completely understandable. I totally can see how you would fall down that rabbit hole he fell down and end up in the situation he was in. And it's such a well-done movie, and everything about it is great. And the other thing they do really well, too, is, Elvis, throughout the movie, is dealing with an anxiety disorder, and I think that's something that's not really, talked about when it comes to him, but he is very obviously dealing with anxiety all through the movie. And one of the things that it does very well is portray the anxiety in a unique way where we, the audience, can feel it too, through camera motion, through, sensory overload, and all of these methods of showing the audience that, putting you in the situation that Elvis himself was in, so that way you don't feel like you're watching the story unfold, you feel like you're part of it. And it's a very well done device, and that's not the only time he does it. He does this great thing where it's because of how the movie is shot and what you're privy to and all of that, it feels like you're part of the story. But even the social outreach stuff, the protest song and the Christmas special and all of that, it's you never really hear about that. And I think it also comes down to, while America also likes its pop icons to be, to take on this form, they also like them apolitical. That's a big part of it as well. We don't want to hear Elvis taking a stance against segregation, because that's one of the things in the movie that is kind of, it's shown a lot, is this idea that he is anti-segregation, and you would think that even to this day, it's people complain they politicized Elvis, but it seems Elvis politicized himself in his own life. And it's just again continuing the idea that we, apolitical or no politics in a movie, to certain aspects of the American public should mean conservative, and the idea that if he's being apolitical and he's not responding to the times, that would be weird. And it's this kind of thing where it's when you watch these movies happen, we talk about a lot, movies and TV don't happen in a void, and music don't happen in a void. For an artist of any kind, be it a director, be it a musician, be it, a painter, be it an actor, for them not to look at the world around them and have that influence them would mean they're not doing their job properly. Because you can't, if you create art without making a statement, then what's the point of making the art in the first place? And I think that's one of the things that this movie really kind of tries to grapple with, this idea that, like, you know, his manager tries to push him through and be like, we're not here to make a statement, we're here to sing. And it's something that, like, you know, it was a thing in the 60s, it was a thing in the 2000s with now they're called the Chicks, or they were the Dixie Chicks at the time. But, like, it's this thing where you're not here to make a political statement, no one wants to hear what you have to say, just entertain them and move on, as if you're a court jester. And it's that same idea. But we'll wrap up there for today. I think we've covered a lot of ground. If you have not seen Elvis yet, which I would assume is the majority of you because it just came out yesterday for preview night, but son of a bitch, what is the point of running a sprinkler system if you're going to run a 360-degree head pointed into the street, or a 180-degree head pointed into the street? It's a waste of money. If you have not seen Elvis yet, go ahead and see it. It's playing in theaters, in premium large format theaters all around the country. I am a little confused about AMC's, what constitutes an AMC artisan film, because here, like, I think I expressed this back when The Batman came out, which was also a Warner Brothers movie, which raises a few questions. I wonder if Black Adam is also going to get this, you know, artisan film label. But the idea of the artisan film came about in the aftermath of Endgame, which was this 3-hour-long movie that had so many screenings that it was occupying theaters and was forcing out smaller releases. Because, like, movies like Fast Color only got 25 screens, and I had to go into Manhattan to see that in 2019. I had to go to the AMC in Times Square. So it was one of two theaters out of their 25. Two theaters of the 25 were in New York City, and, you know, I wasn't go to Times Square rather than go to the other one. I think it was a Regal. But either way, the AMC in Times Square would be part of A-List. We're getting off topic, but that movie only got 25 screens, and you know, that wasn't just 25 AMC screens, it was 25 screens total nationwide. And when you look at what happened with that, after, you know, it wasn't specifically Fast Color, but a number of movies kind of got the short end of the stick because Endgame did that. And there was a conversation to be had broadly about whether or not Endgame needed to have that many screens, although the financial results would speak for themselves, and I think AMC's okay with that. But the idea of the artisan film that's going to stay in theaters, it seemed like the artisan film was more designed for smaller releases. However, in recent years, or specifically this year, the artisan label has been applied to a number of big budget and long movies. Like, I don't think that this movie should have gotten that label, because it was a major, like, if this movie cost less than $150 million, I would be genuinely surprised. But this movie gets the artisan logo. The Batman got the artisan logo, and this movie's 2.5 hours. The Batman is 3 hours, and these two movies both get the artisan label on them. And my question is, why? Why are these movies getting the artisan logo when they go against what the artisan logo should be? Like, oh, it's for committing to the integrity of the artistic integrity of the director, where you can tell the director's vision. Well, if that's the case, and we're sitting here and we're like, well, you know, if we're gonna sit here and throw the artisan logo on anything, then Eternals didn't do well, and you can't sit here and say that was not because they let Chloe Zhao do whatever they want. Like, you can tell there was very little studio interference in Eternals, but Eternals did not get the artisan logo. So my question is, why is this movie getting it? And look, I understand, you're letting Baz Luhrmann do whatever he wants, but if that's the only qualification, then every movie, with the exception of a few major studio movies, is an artisan movie. Because there are, like, you know, by and large, Thor: Love and Thunder, yeah, it's going to introduce characters that are going to go forward in the franchise, but that's Taika Waititi's movie. So if the only thing that determines whether or not a movie is an artisan movie or a standard release is the director getting free rein to do whatever they want, then Thor: Love and Thunder should have that same logo, if that's the rule. If it's not the rule, that I would, if it were me, I would say smaller releases, small budgets, and is also the director telling the story they want to tell. And I feel like we're getting a lot of Warner Brothers releases that are major releases and majorly expensive movies that are getting this logo, and it's like it seems like it's a way to, like, it feels like Warner Brothers is getting these movies with this logo somehow. I'm not entirely sure how that is. I would be curious to see if anyone has explored how it is that Warner Brothers movies keep getting this when Paramount movies don't, and when Disney movies don't, when Lionsgate movies don't, because, it is a valid question, I think. But that's a story for another time. So, until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.